Listen, I have to say that Pacepa is one of a handful of people in my life who has given me a fundamentally different and accurate understanding of the way the world works. Well, the most famous Tsarist disinformation was the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which is the basic deception about the nature of Jews and what Jews do and how much Jews count and all that. So that was Tsarist intelligence. They forged it. They made it up. And it has, of course, gone all over the world, and it's still a bestseller in the Middle East. They did drive it. I mean, it's a Russian creation. And the KGB spread it around and arranged for translations and all of that. Yes, no question. But by now, it's a bestseller. You don't have to do anything. I mean, any publisher who gets his hands on it and puts it out in a language where it doesn't exist is guaranteed to make money on it. So it's going to work. So it happens all by itself. You don't even need to manipulate it anymore. It runs itself. He's illuminated the history of the modern world to me. And I have always said that Red Horizons is the single greatest portrait of a communist society that I've ever read. I think anybody who really wants to understand how the Soviet Empire worked has to read Red Horizons. Well, the most dramatic case is Khomeini, who carried out the Iranian Revolution. I mean, Khomeini, if you read Khomeini's biography carefully, you'll see that he was trained both by Nazis and by communists. So he worked with Nazis on various doctrinal matters because he loved Nazi racism, and he was trained by communists, Soviet communists, on how to organize his movement. So the whole structure of the cadres inside the Khomeini movement came straight from Moscow. So he was, in that sense, he was a direct product of KGB activity. I mean, the PLO trained in the Soviet Union. It's the least secret fact in the modern world. Pacepa revealed all kinds of things about the details of who did what, who Arafat's people were, and I don't remember the guy's name now. What was his name? Anyway, there was some aide to Arafat, and Pacepa wrote in Red Horizons that this guy was the guy that he worked with in providing secret assistance to Arafat and the PLO. And I mentioned this once to a top Israeli expert, and he was amazed. He'd never heard it. I said, well, how can you not have read Pacepa? I said, you got to read Pacepa. And he read it and later thanked me for it. But I always thought, I mean, everybody knew that the Soviet Union was helping the Palestinians. They were there, they were right there. And in fact, CIA, which didn't like that, and didn't like people saying, well, the Soviet Union is training these terrorists, when it became universally known that they were training in the Soviet Union, they changed the definition of the PLO from a terrorist organization to a national liberation front, so they wouldn't have to deal with it. Well, I mean, it's a subject that's worth an encyclopedia unto itself. They created lots of front groups and trained these people. And I mean, the first time I ever ran into this, there was a conference, where was it? Cuba, I guess, in 1968, where all these various terrorists came together. And it's the first such really big-time international conference that I was aware of anyway. And you could see them all meeting together and talking to each other and comparing notes. And the KGB was there. They organized a lot of these things. I think it's useful to keep reminding ourselves of this history, because there is a tendency nowadays to see all these Islamic terrorist organizations as, Sharia-driven organizations. But these guys have been there long before the current passion for Sharia, which is certainly real, but long before it was the number one issue. And so they use whatever they can. And the alliance between radical Muslims and the world communist organizations is very intimate and has been there all along. Nothing new. And why not? They have a common view of the kind of society and government they want to have, totalitarian. And they have a common enemy, us. So there you have it. So, I mean, yeah, we can go through case by case, but what's the point? I mean, it's the general phenomenon that's important. Well, if you don't know facts, you got nowhere to start. And so you buy ideas based on what appeals to you. That's very dangerous. Well, as I say, the only bulwark against disinformation is knowledge. And that's why the educational system is so important, and that's why the current American crisis really is based on the failure of our educational system and the takeover of the educational system by a single ideology. I have no objection to people with all kinds of crazy ideas teaching in our schools. That's fine with me, as long as there's an open debate, as long as our kids hear the full range of opinions and hear the issues argued out. What I cannot stand, and what really terrifies me about the country nowadays, is that it's so monolithic. And you know, people start saying, well, look at Obama. Where did Obama get all these crazy ideas from? I keep saying to them, look, Obama is, you can find 1,000 Obamas in chat rooms online or in dormitories, anywhere in our top universities. Just go in, guys sitting around drinking beer and talking. They'll talk just like him because he believes what they believe. They think the same way he thinks. All these slogans based on nothing. The whole premise of Obama's Middle Eastern policy, let's take that, is that it's America's fault. And most of the things that have gone wrong in the world are our fault, and so we have to undo that. So that's why the Cairo speech, that's why the Great Apology Tour, right? Same business with Russia, reset the relationship with Russia, as they put it, because after all, we have, you know, we're responsible for a lot of the bad relations between the United States and Russia. So he's been out there basically encouraging the most extreme form of anti-Americanism because he sympathizes with it, because he thinks they're legitimate. He thinks that Middle Eastern anti-Americanism is basically legitimate. It's what he believes. So he's been totally unable to recognize the consequences. You know, whatever you think of him, he doesn't get it. That's clear, because he's late to every decision. He never makes a decision on time. So by the time he gets around to doing something, the best outcome is no longer possible. And he's always choosing between bad options. Right? Read that Cairo speech. If you want to see a source of really bad information, Cairo speech, my favorite one, is where he thanks the Muslim world for giving us printing. Right? He has this list of great contributions that Islam has made to world civilization. Well, they have. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But printing is not one of them. Printing is Chinese. So we're in a universe where everything is generated by how do you feel about it? And so it's a manipulation both of information. False information has to be given to people, but also it's a technique of pushing passion buttons in the human spirit to get people to feel angry, jealous, vindictive against people who succeed. But only certain kinds of people who succeed, people on the right who succeed, because people on the left who succeed never get demonized, right? I mean, nobody demonizes Barbra Streisand. Right? Here's a woman who sang some songs. She's one of the richest people in America. What has she done for us recently? Nothing. And how come she deserves all that money? Yes, the Soviets were great at framing it, and it comes from the left-wing slogan, "No enemies on the left." So that even when they knew that Mao was doing a lot of evil things, they would never talk about them because it was bad for their side. So you could only have enemies on the right, only on the left. And you couldn't have allies on the right, only on the left. I mean, this latest Oliver Stone American history, pseudo-American history, is based on an extreme left-wing history text. And it's just total nonsense. And it portrays, again, Comrade Stalin as this poor, misunderstood person. And if we'd only been nicer to Comrade Stalin, things would have worked out so much better. I mean, the Cold War is our fault, according to that. You know, crazy. Yeah, well, I do everything I can to support films of this sort, whether they're documentary films or whether they're films, you know, stories, adventures, whatever. I think adventure movies are extremely important. I think, I remember back when Star Wars came out, the first Star Wars, a friend of mine called me up and said, "You got to see this movie." And I said, "Well, I was planning to see it, but why?" And he said, "It's the first movie in a generation where at the end of the movie, 1 million bad guys are blown up and everybody cheers." Because that was a time when there were all kinds of, I mean, radical left-wing movies about environmental polluters, about, you know, nuclear this and that, on the beach, all of these things, where we were the enemy. We were the bad guys. And here, all of a sudden, I mean, everybody knew that R2-D2 and C-3PO and Princess Leia, I mean, they're Americans, right? I mean, the people identified with them right away. And so when Death Star was blown up, it was a great thing. Yes, Benghazi is a classic example of a government trying to blame its stereotypical enemies for something that its presumed friends actually did, because it's an administration that's been very soft, let's say, on radical Islam. It has been very reluctant to admit that there are these radical Muslim movements that hate us and that are devoted to our destruction. And Benghazi, seen plain, proves that. Right? Here are people in Libya, a country that we helped liberate, who are coming to kill Americans, deliberately, organized to do it. So this event takes place, and anybody who looked at it, I mean, you didn't need intelligence. I wrote a blog right away, and I said, look, this is one of those events, and there are lots of them, where you don't need secret intelligence to know what happened. People, McCain said it right away. He said, look, people demonstrating, protesting some video do not show up in front of an American building carrying RPGs or mortars. And they're very skilled at using them. I mean, you saw right away how good they were at using these things. You fire one at Mrs. President, they adjust it and so on. I mean, these are professionals. Right? They're not crazy demonstrators who are all upset about some lunatic in California making a movie they don't like. No. So you knew it right away. So why did they come out and say it's the result of this demonstration, right? Until they could no longer deny it. And now I see that even this commission, who should have been reliable, after all, to endorse the government line, didn't, right? Came out and said State Department, inadequate security, weren't ready for it, no evidence of a demonstration, right? And there was no evidence of demonstration. Again, all you had to do was read the report, listen to what had happened, and you knew that this was a terrorist attack. But that's bad for their story. And how can they advance a policy which basically, I mean, go from Benghazi to Syria for a second. What are we doing in Syria? Well, nothing. is the short answer. What are we preparing to do in Syria? We say we are now going to support some of these Muslims. However, there's one group of Muslims that we already tagged as friends of Al-Qaeda. Why would you do that? I mean, the whole point is to get inside these movements and figure out who's worth working with and who's just an enemy, period. Right? The big intelligence failure all across the Middle East is that we do not know who is who. Among peoples around the world is very easy to answer. It encourages our enemies because we're feckless and we're ineffective and we don't move against them. And it discourages our friends because we don't stand by them and we don't fight for them.